Leela Bennett lived on the edge of a place people called the Redwood Expanse. It was a vast forest that stretched farther than anyone could see, filled with trees so tall they seemed to touch the clouds. The air there smelled fresh but carried an undertone of something strange, something metallic, almost unnatural. People avoided this area because it wasn't just any forest. Strange things happened here, things no one could explain for years. Scientists had warned about the dangers lurking within the expanse. They said it was full of creatures that didn't belong, not bears or wolves or deer like you might expect, but monsters twisted by forgotten experiments. These weren't animals anymore. They were something else entirely. Some called them apex predators. Others referred to them as apex creatures. Whatever their name, everyone agreed these beasts couldn't be controlled. But Leela didn't believe that. She never did. While most people stayed far away from the expanse, she spent her days studying its secrets. Every morning, she would walk into the woods armed only with binoculars, notebooks, and a deep curiosity. From dawn until dusk, she observed the movements of the creatures, jotting down notes about how they hunted, communicated, and interacted with each other. To her, they weren't mindless killers. There was intelligence in their eyes, purpose in their actions. But every time she tried to share her findings, no one listened. They're not smart, people told her. They're dangerous, stay away. Even at conferences where experts gathered to discuss the latest discoveries in biology and genetics, Leela's theories fell flat. When she stood up to present her research, showing videos of the creatures solving puzzles or mimicking human behavior, the room grew silent, but not out of admiration. Most dismissed her work as fantasy or blamed faulty equipment for what she claimed to have seen. After enough ridicule, she stopped trying to convince them. Instead, she focused on her own little corner of the world, content to live among the mysteries of the expanse. Her home was modest, a small wooden cabin surrounded by dense trees. Inside, shelves overflowed with books about animal behavior, ecology, and evolution. Maps covered the walls, marked with trails she'd explored and sightings she'd recorded. Outside, a garden provided vegetables and herbs, though she often supplemented her meals with canned goods bought during rare trips to town. Life was quiet, predictable, and safe as it could be when living next to a forbidden zone. One day, everything changed. It started with a storm. Lightning split the sky, thunder rattled the windows, and rain poured down in sheets. Leela huddled inside, sipping tea while listening to the wind howl through the pines. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind puddles and fallen branches scattered across the ground. As usual, she grabbed her gear and headed out to check on the wildlife. Heavy rain sometimes drove the creatures closer to her cabin, and she wanted to make sure none were injured. She found him near the edge of the expanse, lying motionless beneath a broken tree branch. At first glance, he looked like a pile of wet fur, but as she approached cautiously, she realized what he was: a tiger cub. Not just any tiger cub, though. Tigers didn't live in North America. Yet there he was, shivering and whimpering softly, his golden eyes wide with fear. Leela hesitated. Everyone knew better than to interfere with apex creatures. Even cubs could turn aggressive if provoked. But this one seemed different. He wasn't growling or baring his teeth. He was too weak even to stand. Something inside her stirred a mix of pity and defiance. If she left him, he'd die. And maybe, just maybe, saving him would give her a chance to prove her theories right. Carefully, she wrapped him in her jacket and carried him back to the cabin. Once inside, she dried him off with towels and fed him warm milk from a bottle. Over the next few days, she nursed him back to health, marveling at how quickly he recovered. His coat gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the window, and his playful energy soon filled the tiny space. She named him Stripe, after the bold black lines running down his sides. At first, Stripe behaved like any normal tiger cub. He chased shadows, gnawed on sticks, and curled up beside Leela whenever she sat down to read. But as he grew older, subtle differences began to emerge. For instance, he paid close attention to her routines. Whenever she reached for the kettle to boil water, he'd trot over and sit patiently nearby, tail flicking. If she picked up a pen to write in her notebook, he'd stretch out beside her feet, watching intently as though trying to understand what she was doing. Leela noticed other oddities too. One evening, after accidentally dropping a spoon under the table, she bent down to retrieve it. Before she could grab it, Stripe nudged it toward her with his nose, then stepped back and waited. Another time, she caught him pawing at the handle of the workshop door, turning it slowly until it clicked open. When she entered, he followed obediently, sitting down as if awaiting further instructions. These moments puzzled her. Was Stripe simply imitating her, or was there something deeper going on? She decided to test him, setting up a series of simple Tasks like ringing a bell or retrieving specific objects, she rewarded him with treats. Whenever he succeeded, to her amazement, he learned faster than any animal she'd ever studied. Within weeks, he could perform complex sequences of actions, responding to both verbal commands and hand signals. Still, questions lingered. How had he ended up abandoned near her cabin? Why did he possess such extraordinary abilities? Determined to find answers, Leela combed through old records and news articles about the expanse. She discovered rumors of secret experiments conducted decades earlier. Before stricter regulations shut them down, scientists had been experimenting with genetic engineering, attempting to enhance animal intelligence and adaptability. Many projects failed spectacularly, resulting in unstable hybrids that escaped into the wild. Could Stripe be one of those experiments? Her suspicions deepened when she came across a grainy photograph online, taken years ago. It showed a group of researchers standing outside a crumbling lab building. In the background, barely visible, was a cage containing a young tiger cub. The resemblance to Stripe was uncanny. Word of her unusual companion eventually spread beyond the confines of her cabin. A local hunter passing through the area spotted Stripe lounging in the yard and reported it to authorities. Overnight, stories circulated about a woman living alone with a tame tiger. Reporters descended upon her property, eager to capture footage of the alleged miracle. Neighbors whispered nervously, torn between fascination and fear. Not everyone reacted kindly. One night, a group of scavengers arrived, hoping to capture Stripe for profit. They believed his unique traits made him valuable, perhaps worth millions on the black market. Armed with tranquilizer guns and nets, they crept onto her land under cover of darkness. Leela woke to the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. Peering out the window, she saw shadowy figures moving toward the shed where Stripe slept. Her heart raced. Grabbing a flashlight and a sturdy stick, she slipped outside, determined to protect him at all cost. "Leave," she shouted, waving the light beam across their faces. "You don't want to do this." The men laughed, unfazed. "Relax, lady. We'll take good care of your pet." Stripe emerged from the shed, his ears flattened and his muscles tense. For a moment, he stared at the intruders, assessing the situation. Then, with astonishing speed, he lunged forward, snarling fiercely. The men scrambled backward, firing darts wildly. One struck Stripe's flank, causing him to stumble momentarily, but only momentarily. With renewed determination, he charged again, forcing the scavengers to retreat into the woods, breathing heavily. Leela rushed to Stripe's side. Blood trickled from where the dart had pierced his skin, but otherwise he seemed unharmed. Together, they watched as the last of the intruders disappeared into the night. Afterward, Leela knew she couldn't stay. Sooner or later, someone else would come looking for Stripe, and next time, they might succeed. Packing essentials into a backpack, she prepared to leave the only home she'd ever known. As she secured the straps, Stripe padded over, gazing up at her with unwavering trust. "Don't worry," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We'll figure this out together." With that, they set off into the wilderness, ready to uncover the truth about who and what Stripe really was. Let me know if you'd like me to format this into a separate document or continue writing additional parts. Leela and Stripe traveled deeper into the wilderness, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the scavengers. The forest grew denser with each passing day, the trees towering higher and the underbrush thicker. They followed narrow trails that wound through the landscape like veins, occasionally crossing streams or climbing over fallen logs. Leela carried a map she'd drawn herself, marking routes based on her years of exploring the area. Still, even she had never ventured this far before. Stripe stayed close to her side, his golden eyes scanning their surroundings with sharp focus. He seemed to sense danger before it arrived, his ears twitching at the faintest rustle of leaves or snap of twigs. More than once, he stopped abruptly, staring into the shadows until whatever lurked there moved on. Leela trusted him completely. If anyone or anything tried to harm them, she knew he would protect her. They camped wherever nightfall caught them, setting up makeshift shelters from branches and moss. Leela cooked meals over small fires, sharing bits of dried meat and fruit with Stripe. Despite the challenges of life on the move, they fell into a rhythm. Each morning began with a stretch and a drink from a nearby stream, followed by hours of steady walking. By evening, they were both exhausted but safe. As they journeyed, Leela couldn't stop thinking about the photograph she'd seen online. The one showing the tiger cub in a cage outside an old lab building. Something about it haunted her. Who were those researchers? What had they been trying to achieve? And why had they abandoned their work or been forced to abandon it? She needed answers, not just for her own peace of mind but for Stripe's sake too. Whatever experiments created him, they left him incomplete. There had to be more to his story. After several days of travel, they reached the ruins of what looked like an old research outpost. It was little more than a cluster of crumbling concrete walls and rusted metal frames, half buried beneath vines and moss. A faded sign hung crookedly above the entrance, its letters barely legible, Project Apex. Lila's heart raced. This had to be connected to the experiments she'd read about. Carefully, she stepped inside, Stripe trailing behind her. The air smelled damp and metallic, carrying a faint hum that made her skin prickle. Broken equipment littered the floor, computers stripped of their parts, shattered glass tubes, and tangled wires snaking across the ground. Papers lay scattered everywhere, some yellowed with age, others torn and waterlogged. She knelt to examine them, brushing away dirt and debris. Most of the documents were technical jargon she didn't fully understand, filled with terms like neural augmentation and behavioral conditioning. But one phrase caught her eye: Prototype Alpha 1. Beneath it was a crude drawing of a tiger cub labeled with notes about enhanced learning capabilities and adaptive instincts. Her breath caught. That was Stripe digging deeper. She uncovered video logs stored on damaged hard drives. Using tools from her backpack, she managed to repair one just enough to play a short clip. Static flickered across the screen, then resolved into grainy footage of a young tiger cub sitting in a sterile white room. Researchers stood around him, speaking in hushed tones while pointing at monitors displaying brainwave patterns. The cub tilted his head, watching them curiously. This is Subject Alpha 1, a voice said off screen. Day 47 of cognitive training. Response times continue to improve. Initiating sequence B. The scene shifted. Now the cub faced a series of puzzles designed to test problem-solving skills. First, he pushed blocks into specific slots, earning clicks and flashes of light as rewards. Next, he turned handles to open doors, retrieving treats hidden behind them. Finally, he mimicked gestures made by a researcher, pawing at symbols projected onto a wall. Every success brought cheers from the team, though their excitement felt hollow somehow, as if they weren't entirely sure what they were creating or why. Leela watched the footage over and over, tears streaming down her face. Stripe wasn't just intelligent, he'd been engineered to be intelligent. Someone had spent years teaching him how to think, how to learn, how to adapt, and then they'd thrown him away like garbage. Stripe sat beside her, nudging her hand gently as if sensing her distress. She wiped her eyes and scratched behind his ears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll fix this. I promise," but fixing things wouldn't be easy. As they continued searching the ruins, Leela found evidence suggesting the project hadn't ended cleanly. Burn marks scorched the walls, and bullet casings lay scattered near the exits. Whatever happened here, it involved violence. Notes scrawled hastily on scraps of paper hinted at disagreements among the researchers, arguments about ethics and control. One particularly chilling entry read, "If we can't contain them, no one will." Contain who? Just Stripe and the other prototypes, or something bigger? Her questions multiplied, but answers remained elusive. After 2 days of combing through the wreckage, she realized she'd hit a dead end. The outpost held clues, but no clear explanation. If she wanted to learn more, she'd have to go farther still, to the source of the experiments themselves. According to the map she carried, the nearest major facility lay deep within the redwood expanse, buried beneath layers of forestry growth. Known locally as the Black Ridge Complex, it had once housed cutting-edge biotech labs before being shut down amid scandal. Rumors claimed the government sealed it off after discovering dangerous failures in containment protocols. Few dared venture near it now, and fewer still returned to tell the tale. Still, Leela had no choice. With Stripe at her side, she set a course for Black Ridge, steeling herself for whatever awaited them. The journey proved grueling. Thick fog rolled in, obscuring the path and making navigation nearly impossible. Rain soaked them to the bone, turning the ground into slippery mud. At night, temperatures plummeted, forcing them to huddle together for warmth. Yet despite the hardships, they pressed onward, driven by a shared determination. On the 5th day, they encountered another traveler, a man named Jake. He appeared suddenly from the trees, startling them both. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and a scruffy beard, he looked like someone who lived rough for a long time. A rifle slung across his back marked him as a hunter, though his wary expression suggested he wasn't hunting animals anymore. "You're brave to come this way," he said, eyeing Stripe warily. "Or maybe just foolish." "We need information," Leela replied, keeping her tone steady. "About Black Ridge." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That place is death. Why risk it? It's personal," she said simply. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Mind if I tag along? I've got my own reasons for heading that direction. Reluctantly, Leela agreed. She didn't trust him, not yet, but having another pair of eyes might prove useful. Besides, Jake seemed to know the terrain better than she did. He led them through shortcuts and warned them of hazards they'd otherwise have missed. Over time, they formed an uneasy alliance. Jake revealed bits of his backstory during quiet moments around the campfire. Once a soldier, he deserted after witnessing atrocities committed in the name of science. His younger brother had disappeared while investigating rumors of illegal genetic experiments, and Jake hoped to find closure or revenge at Black Ridge. In return, Leela shared her discoveries about Stripe and the Project Apex experiments. Jake listened intently, occasionally offering insights based on his military experience. Together, they pieced together fragments of a larger puzzle, though much remained unclear. Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached the edge of Black Ridge. The complex loomed ahead, partially reclaimed by nature. Trees sprouted from cracked foundations, and ivy crept over rusted fences. A massive gate blocked the entrance, its hinges fused shut with corrosion. Beyond it, rows of crumbling buildings stretched into the distance, their windows dark and empty. This is it, Leela murmured, clutching her pack tightly. Let's see what secrets they left behind. With Jake's help, she pried open the gate just wide enough to slip through. Inside, the air felt heavy, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle. Stripe padded silently beside her, his tail low and stiff. Even Jake seemed uneasy, gripping his rifle tighter as they moved forward. The first structure they entered appeared to be a storage facility. Shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten supplies, boxes of syringes, jars of chemicals, stacks of files bound in brittle rubber bands. Leela sifted through them eagerly, uncovering more details about Project Apex and its goals. Apparently, the researchers aimed not only to enhance animal intelligence but also to create hybrid species capable of surviving extreme environments. Some notes hinted at plans to use these creatures for military purposes, though specifics remained vague. Deeper into the complex, they discovered laboratories frozen in time. Microscopes sat unused. Slides still clamped in place. Freezers lined the walls, their contents long since thawed and rotted. Monitors displayed static-filled screens, relics of a digital age now obsolete. Here and there, remnants of experiments lingered, cages too small for comfort. Surgical tools stained brown with dried blood. Lila's stomach churned. These people hadn't just experimented on animals, they'd tortured them. No wonder so many creatures fled when the facilities collapsed. No wonder they attacked humans who came too close. After leaving Black Ridge, Leela, Stripe, and Jake traveled deeper into the wilderness. The forest grew thicker, darker, and more untamed with each step. Trees stretched endlessly toward the sky, their branches intertwining to block out the sunlight. The air felt heavy, thick with moisture and a scent of moss. Every sound, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds seemed magnified, as if the world itself was watching them. Leela carried the schematic sheet, found at Black Ridge tucked safely inside her pack. She studied them whenever they stopped to rest, tracing the diagrams with her finger and trying to make sense of the notes scrawled in the margins. The neural implants described in the documents were meant to unlock hidden abilities in creatures, like Stripe, but activating those abilities required specific tools and knowledge, things she didn't have yet. Still, she clung to hope. If she could figure it out, maybe she could help Stripe understand his own potential. Stripe seemed to sense her determination. He stayed close, always alert, his golden eyes scanning the surroundings with sharp focus. Whenever danger approached, a rustle in the bushes or a shadow moving too quickly, he stepped in front of her, ready to protect her. Leela marveled at how much he trusted her, even after everything he'd been through. Whatever experiments had created him, they hadn't erased his capacity for loyalty or love. Jake walked a few paces ahead, clearing the path with his machete. Though he rarely spoke, his presence gave Leela a strange kind of comfort. He was practical, resourceful, and unflinching in the face of danger, qualities that balanced her quiet curiosity. Together, they formed an odd trio, a woman chasing answers, a soldier seeking redemption, and a tiger who defied all logic. Their journey wasn't easy. Food became scarce, forcing them to rely on whatever they could hunt or gather. Water sources were unpredictable, often tainted by runoff from the expanse. Nights brought biting cold and restless sleep, punctuated by the howls of unseen predators. Yet despite the hardships, they pressed on, driven by a shared need to uncover the truth. One evening, as they set up camp near a shallow stream, Jake broke the silence. "You ever think about what happens next?" he asked, tossing another log onto the fire. Sparks spiraled upward, disappearing into the dark canopy above. "What do you mean?" Leela replied, stirring a pot of stew over the flames. I mean, assuming we find what we're looking for, then what? You've got a tiger smarter than most people. I've got questions about my brother. But none of this changes the bigger picture. These creatures are out here, wild and uncontrollable. What happens when someone else finds them? Leela hesitated. She hadn't let herself think that far ahead. All her energy had gone into survival and discovery. I don't know, she admitted finally, but I can't just leave them like this. Not after seeing what they went through. Jake nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Fair enough, just saying, it's not going to be simple. They ate in silence after that. The crackling fire the only sound between them. Stripe curled up nearby, his head resting on his paws. Even asleep, he looked watchful, as if guarding their dreams. The next morning, they continued their trek, following a narrow trail that wound through the trees. By midday, the forest began to change. The ground sloped downward, leading them into a valley surrounded by steep cliffs. At first glance, it seemed untouched by human hands, a pristine haven of greenery and wildlife. Birds flitted between branches, their songs weaving together in a symphony of sound. Deer grazed peacefully in clearings, lifting their heads only briefly to watch the travelers pass. But as they ventured deeper, subtle signs hinted at something unusual. The animals moved with purpose, almost as if they were organized. Wolves trotted in coordinated packs, their movements fluid and deliberate. Bears lumbered along paths worn smooth by frequent use, avoiding humans entirely unless provoked. Even insects buzzed in patterns that suggested communication beyond instinct. Leela noticed these details and wrote them down in her notebook. To her, they confirmed what she'd suspected all along. The creatures of the expanse weren't mindless beasts. They possessed intelligence and possibly something more. As they reached the center of the valley, they stumbled upon a sight that took their breath away. A massive tree stood there, its trunk wider than any Leela had ever seen. Its roots spread outward like arms, creating natural shelters beneath its canopy. Around the base of the tree, symbols had been carved into the bark, patterns of lines and circles that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. What is this place? Jake whispered, his voice filled with awe. I don't know, Leela said, stepping closer. But it feels important. Stripe padded forward, brushing past her legs to stand directly in front of the tree. For a moment, he simply stared at the carvings, his tail swishing slowly. Then, with surprising gentleness, he reached out and touched one of the symbols with his paw. The mark glowed brighter for an instant, then dimmed again. Lila's heart raced. Did you see that? Jake nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. Yeah. And I'm starting to wonder if this trip is crazier than I thought. Before they could discuss it further, movement caught their attention. From the shadows emerged a group of creatures unlike anything they'd encountered before. There were wolves with iridescent fur, bears with glowing eyes, and birds whose feathers shimmered like liquid metal. Each one radiated an aura of calm confidence, as if they belonged to a higher order. At the center of the group stood a massive cattle lioness with a mane streaked silver and black. Her gaze locked onto Stripe, and for a moment, the entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Leela instinctively moved to shield Stripe, but he stepped forward instead, meeting the lioness halfway. They circled each other cautiously, their bodies low to the ground. Then, without warning, the lioness lowered her head in a gesture eerily similar to the one Stripe had made back at Black Ridge. Stripe mirrored the motion, bowing his head as well. When he lifted it again, the tension in the air dissolved. The other creatures relaxed visibly, some lying down while others wandered off to explore the area. They recognized him, Leela murmured, her voice trembling. But why? Jake shook his head. Your guess is as good as mine. Over the next few days, they settled into the valley, observing the creatures and learning their habits. Leela spent hours sketching the symbols on the tree and comparing them to the schematics from Black Ridge. Slowly, connections began to form in her mind. The marks weren't random. They were part of a language, a way for the creatures to communicate with each other, and, perhaps, with humans. Stripe played a central role in bridging that gap. Whenever Leela traced a symbol in the dirt or mimicked a sound she'd heard, he responded with gestures or actions that clarified its meaning. Through trial and error, they pieced together fragments of understanding. Some symbols represented concepts like safe or danger. Others conveyed emotions like trust or fear. Over time, Leela realized the creatures weren't just intelligent, they were trying to reach out. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Leela sat beside the great tree with Stripe at her side. Jake joined them, leaning against one of the roots with a thoughtful expression. You think they're waiting for something? He asked, nodding toward the creatures gathered around the tree. Maybe, Leela said softly, or maybe they're waiting for someone. Stripe tilted his head, gazing up at her with those piercing golden eyes. It was almost as if he understood what she was saying and agreed. The next morning, Leela decided to test a theory. Using materials scavenged from Black Ridge, she constructed a crude device designed to emit the same frequency mentioned in the schematics. According to the notes, the signal was meant to activate dormant abilities embedded in the creature's DNA. If it worked, it might reveal the true extent of their intelligence and Stripe's role in all of this. She positioned the device near the tree, her hands trembling as she powered it on. A soft hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The creatures paused, turning their attention toward the source of the noise. Stripe stood rigid, his muscles tense, as if bracing himself for something. Then, suddenly, the hum peaked and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Stripe let out a low growl, deep and resonant, that echoed through the valley. The other creatures responded in kind, their voices blending together in a chorus that sent shivers down Lila's spine. The symbols on the tree began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with the sounds. And then, something extraordinary happened. Stripe stepped forward, placing his paw on one of the glowing marks. This time, instead of dimming, the light spread outward, illuminating the entire tree. Images flickered across its surface, scenes of forest, mountains, oceans, and cities. Voices overlapped, speaking in tones both familiar and alien. Leela dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. "It's a message," she whispered. "They're showing us something." Jake knelt beside her, his face pale. "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I think they're telling us their story." As the images faded and the valley returned to silence, Leela felt a profound shift within herself. These creatures weren't monsters or experiments gone wrong. They were survivors, bearers of knowledge passed down through generations. And Stripe wasn't just a tiger, he was a link, a brie. The valley remained quiet after the glowing symbols on the tree faded. Leela sat motionless, her mind racing to process what she had just witnessed. The images flashing across the bark weren't random, they told a story, though much of it was still unclear. She saw glimpses of forest being destroyed, rivers drying up, skies darkened by smoke. Then came flashes of humans in white coats, holding tools that sparked with blue light. Creatures like Stripe hybrids, experiments appeared next, their eyes wide with confusion and pain. And finally, there were scenes of escape, animals fleeing into the wild, seeking refuge in places untouched by human hands. Stripe stayed close, his body tense but calm. He seemed to understand the significance of what they had seen. When Leela reached out to touch his fur, he leaned into her hand, offering silent reassurance. "What did we just watch?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if speaking too loudly might disturb a fragile peace around them. "I'm not sure," Leela admitted, "but it feels like a warning, or maybe a plea." Jake frowned. "A plea for what?" "For help," she said softly. "They're trying to tell us something. Maybe about where they came from or why they're here." He didn't respond immediately, instead staring at the great tree with its now dim carvings. After a moment, he stood and began pacing, his boots crunching softly against the mossy ground. "This changes things," he muttered. "If these creatures are smarter than we thought and if they're trying to communicate, it means we can't ignore them anymore. But how do we even start?" Leela didn't have an answer. All she knew was that Stripe held the key. Whatever abilities the neural implants had unlocked, they allowed him to connect with the other creatures in ways no human could. Watching him interact with the lioness or the wolves made it clear. He wasn't just one of them. He was special. Over the next few days, Leela focused on understanding the message embedded in the glowing symbols. She sketched each carving in detail, comparing them to the schematics she brought from Black Ridge. Slowly, patterns emerged. Some symbols represented concepts like home or family. Others conveyed emotions like fear or hope. Together, they formed a kind of language, one that required both observation and intuition to decode. Stripe helped whenever he could. Whenever Leela mimicked a sound or traced a pattern in the dirt, he responded with gestures or actions that clarified its meaning. Through trial and error, they pieced together fragments of understanding. It was slow work, frustrating at times, but every breakthrough brought them closer to unraveling the mystery. As they worked, the creatures in the valley grew more comfortable around them. Wolves approached cautiously, sniffing the air before lying down nearby. Birds perched on branches overhead, chirping melodies that seemed almost musical. Even the bears, massive and imposing, lumbered past without aggression. They acted less like wild animals and more like guardians, watching over the valley with quiet purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Leela noticed something unusual. The lioness, the Same one who had greeted Stripe when they first arrived approached her slowly. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. Behind her trailed several other creatures, a wolf with shimmering fur, a bird with feathers that glinted like gold, and a bear whose eyes gleamed with intelligence. Leela froze, unsure what to expect. Stripe stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the approaching group. But instead of hostility, the lioness lowered her head in a gesture of respect. The others followed suit, bowing deeply before retreating back into the trees. What was that about? Jake asked, emerging from the shelter where he'd been sharpening his knife. I don't know, Leela said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think they're acknowledging him. Acknowledging us. Jake raised an eyebrow. You mean, like, welcoming us? Maybe. Or maybe they're asking for something. The encounter left Leela restless. That night, as she lay awake beside the fire, she replayed the events in her mind. The lioness's bow, the glowing symbols, the images on the tree, they all pointed to one conclusion. Stripe wasn't just a survivor of Project Apex, he was part of something bigger. Perhaps he had been created or trained to lead by morning. She had made up her mind. If the creatures trusted Stripe enough to accept her presence, then she owed it to them to uncover the truth. Gathering her notes and tools, she prepared to test another theory, activating the dormant abilities within Stripe. Using the device she'd built from scavenged parts, she adjusted the frequency based on calculations from the schematics. According to the documents, the signal needed to be precise, not too high, not too low to trigger the neural implants. If successful, it would enhance Stripe's ability to communicate, possibly unlocking memories or instincts buried deep within his mind. She positioned the device near the great tree, ensuring Stripe was close enough to feel its effects. Her hands trembled as she powered it on. A soft hum filled the air, growing louder until it resonated through the entire valley. The creatures paused, turning their attention toward the source of the noise. Stripe stood rigid, his muscles taut as if bracing himself for impact. Then, suddenly, the hum peaked and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Stripe let out a low growl, deeper and richer than anything Leela had heard before. The sound reverberated through the valley, causing the ground beneath her feet to vibrate slightly. The other creatures responded in kind, their voices blending together in a symphony that sent shivers down her spine. And then, something extraordinary occurred. Stripe stepped forward, placing his paw on one of the glowing symbols. This time, instead of fading, the light spread outward, illuminating the entire tree. Images flickered across its surface once more, but this time they were clearer, more detailed. Scenes of destruction gave way to visions of renewal, forest regrowing, rivers flowing clean, skies clearing. In the final image, humans and creatures stood side by side, working together to heal the land. Tears welled in Lila's eyes as she realized the message. Coexistence was possible, but only if both sides chose to trust each other. Stripe turned to face her, his golden eyes shining with an intensity that took her breath away. For the first time, she truly understood what he wanted: not freedom, not revenge, but connection, a chance to belong. We'll do it, she whispered, kneeling beside him. Whatever it takes, we'll find a way. Behind her, Jake watched, silently, his expression unreadable. But when she glanced at him, he nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the weight of what they had discovered. The next day, they began planning their next move. Leela knew they couldn't stay in the valley forever. Sooner or later, someone would come looking for them, or worse, for the creatures. They needed to find a way to protect this place, to ensure it remained safe from outside interference. Jake SUGGESTED fortifying the perimeter, using fallen logs and rocks to create barriers. Leela agreed, but insisted they also document everything: the symbols, the messages, the behaviors of the creatures. If they were forced to leave, at least they'd have proof of what existed here. Stripe seemed to sense their urgency. He roamed the valley tirelessly, guiding them to hidden paths and water sources. Occasionally, he would pause and stare at the horizon, as if listening for something far away. Leela wondered if he was searching for others like him, scattered survivors of Project Apex. Their preparations were interrupted one afternoon by the distant roar of engines. At first, they thought it might be thunder, but the sound grew louder, sharper, until it became unmistakable. Helicopters, they found us, Jake said grimly, gripping his rifle. We need to move. Leela hesitated, torn between staying to protect the valley and fleeing to keep Stripe safe. Before she could decide, the lioness appeared, leading a group of creatures toward the edge of the forest. Their posture was defensive, ready to fight if necessary. No, Leela said firmly. We're not letting them hurt you. She grabbed her pack and the device, signaling for Jake to follow. Together, they moved deeper into the valley, seeking cover among the dense trees. Stripe stayed close, his powerful frame cutting through the underbrush with ease. The helicopters circled overhead, their rotors kicking up clouds of dust. Voices crackled over loudspeakers, demanding surrender. Leela ignored them, focusing instead on finding a way out. The valley was vast, but it wasn't infinite. Somewhere, there had to be an exit, a path leading away from danger. Finally, they reached a narrow passageway carved into the cliffs. It was dark and damp, but it offered a chance to escape. Without hesitation, Leela led the way inside, trusting Stripe to guide them through the shadows. As they disappeared into the tunnel, the creatures outside rallied, forming a barrier between the intruders and the heart of the valley. Their unified stance sent a clear message: this place was theirs, and they would defend it. Leela felt a surge of pride and guilt. These creatures had chosen to trust her, to let her glimpse their world. Now, she had to honor that trust, no matter what happened next. She vowed to protect them even if it meant sacrificing everything else. The tunnel through the cliffs was dark and damp, its walls slick with moisture. Leela moved cautiously, her flashlight casting shaky beams of light ahead. Behind her, Jake followed closely, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Stripe padded silently beside them, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dimness. The air smelled earthy, filled with the scent of wet stone and moss. Every step echoed softly, reminding them how fragile their escape was. They didn't speak. Much as they walked, words felt unnecessary, even risky. The distant roar of helicopters still lingered in their ears, a constant reminder that danger wasn't far behind. Whoever had come looking for them or for the valley wouldn't give up easily. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the intruders. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a narrow ravine. Sunlight streamed down from above, illuminating patches of greenery clinging stubbornly to the rocky walls. A stream trickled along the bottom, its clear water reflecting shards of light. It was a small but welcome relief after the suffocating darkness of the tunnel. Leela knelt by the stream, cupping water in her hands to drink. Stripe lapped at it eagerly, while Jake refilled their canteens. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to rest, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water and birds chirping high above. "We can't stay here," Jake said finally, breaking the quiet. "They'll find us if we don't keep moving." Leela nodded, though her body ached with exhaustion. She glanced at Stripe, who seemed alert but calm. "You think they'll follow us?" she asked. "They might," Jake replied grimly. "But we've got one advantage. They don't know this terrain like we do. If we stick to the hard paths, they'll lose us." With renewed determination, they pressed onward. The ravine twisted and turned, forcing them to climb over boulders and wade through shallow pools. Stripe led the way, his instincts guiding them towards safer ground. Whenever the path split, he paused, sniffing the air before choosing a direction. Leela trusted him completely, knowing he understood the land better than any map could show. As they traveled, Leela thought about the valley they'd left behind. She imagined the creatures standing guard, united in their defense of the sacred space. Would they hold off the intruders, or would the helicopters force their way inside, destroying everything in their search for answers? Or power. Her chest tightened at the thought. The valley wasn't just a refuge. It was proof of something greater, a glimpse of what could be achieved when humans and animals worked together. Losing it would mean losing hope itself. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The ground was soft with fallen needles, and the air carried the faint smell of resin. Leela suggested they stop for a short break, needing time to gather her thoughts. While Jake scouted the perimeter, she pulled out her notebook and began sketching the symbols from the great tree. Each mark held meaning, and she wanted to preserve them in case they never returned. Stripe lay beside her, watching intently as her pencil moved across the page. Occasionally, he nudged her arm, drawing her attention to specific symbols. When she traced those marks again, he let out a low rumble, almost like approval. It was as if he understood what she was doing and why. "You're helping me, aren't you?" she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You always have." He blinked slowly, a gesture she'd come to recognize as affection. In that moment, she felt a deep connection not just to Stripe, but to all the creatures they'd encountered. These beings weren't mindless experiments or accidents of science. They were individuals, each carrying fragments of a story meant to be shared. When Jake returned, he brought news. "I saw tracks," he said, pointing back toward the ravine. "Fresh ones. Someone's following us." Lila's stomach sank. "How close are they?" "Not too close yet," he admitted. "But we need to move faster. They're gaining on us." Without wasting another second, they packed up and resumed their journey. The forest grew denser, the trails narrower and harder to navigate. Stripe took the lead once more, his powerful frame cutting through the underbrush with ease. Leela struggled to keep up, her legs burning with every step. Jake stayed behind her, urging her forward whenever she faltered. Just as dusk began to fall, they stumbled upon an old cabin hidden among the trees. Its wooden walls were weathered and cracked, but it offered shelter from the approaching night. Inside, they found remnants of a previous occupant, a rusted stove, a broken chair, and shelves lined with empty jars. Dust covered everything, suggesting no one had been there in years. "This will do for tonight," Jake said, setting down his pack. "We can regroup tomorrow." Leela agreed reluctantly, though she hated stopping so soon. She knew they couldn't risk traveling in the dark. Exhaustion had already slowed them down, and the last thing they needed was an injury or worse. While Jake built a fire outside, Leela explored the cabin further. In one corner, she discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a small metal box, its surface tarnished with age. Her heart raced as she opened it, revealing a collection of papers and photographs. Most were faded and brittle, but one image stood out: a group of scientists posing in front of a lab building. Behind them, cages housed various animals, including a tiger cub that looked eerily similar to Stripe. She stared at the photo, her hands trembling. This place must have been connected to Project Apex. Whoever lived here had known about the experiments and perhaps even helped conduct them. "Look at this," she said, showing the picture to Jake when he came inside. He frowned, studying it carefully. "That's Black Ridge," he said after a moment, "or at least, part of it. See the logo on the wall?" Leela squinted at the tiny emblem printed near the entrance. Sure enough, it matched the one she'd seen during their earlier exploration. "This confirms it," she whispered. The project extended beyond the labs. There were outposts like this scattered throughout the area. Jake nodded grimly. "Which means there could be more survivors. More creatures like Stripe." The realization sent a chill down her spine. If other prototypes existed, where were they now? Were they hiding, waiting for someone to find them? Or had they succumbed to the same chaos that destroyed Black Ridge? Before she could dwell on it further, Stripe let out a sharp growl. His ears flattened, and his tail swished angrily. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's thin walls. Something or someone was nearby. "Stay here," Jake said, grabbing his rifle. He slipped outside, disappearing into the shadows. Leela clutched the photo tightly, her pulse racing. Stripe positioned himself in front of her, ready to defend her at a moment's notice. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching endlessly. Finally, Jake reappeared, shaking his head. "It's nothing," he said, lowering his weapon. "Just a deer. But we should keep watch tonight." No chances. They took turns keeping vigil, trading shifts as the fire burned low. Leela volunteered for the first watch. Unable to sleep anyway, sitting by the flames, she gazed into the darkness, thinking about the road ahead. They couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, they'd have to confront whoever was chasing them and decide what to do with the knowledge. They'd uncover Dot when morning came. They set out again, leaving the cabin behind. The forest seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath. Birds sang softly, and the breeze carried the scent of pine, yet beneath the calm, tension simmered. They weren't safe, not yet. Several hours later, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast plain. From their vantage point, they could see smoke rising in the distance, marking the location of a settlement. Leela hesitated, unsure whether to approach it or avoid it entirely. "We need supplies," Jake pointed out, "and information. Maybe someone there knows something about Project Apex." She nodded reluctantly. "Let's go. But we stay careful." As they descended toward the settlement, Stripe remained close, his presence both comforting and protective. The closer they got, the more signs of human activity appeared: fences, vehicles, and makeshift shelters. People moved about, tending to crops or repairing buildings. It was a community struggling to survive, much like the creatures in the valley. When they entered, heads turned to watch them pass. Whispers spread quickly, curiosity mingling with suspicion. Leela ignored the stares, focusing instead on finding someone who might help. A woman approached them, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp. "You're not from around here," she said, her tone neutral. "No," Leela admitted. "We're looking for answers about the expanse and the creatures living there." The woman studied them for a moment, then nodded. "Come with me." She led them to a small house at the edge of the settlement. Inside, she poured tea and gestured for them to sit. "Many years ago," she began, "this land belonged to the government. They conducted experiments, dangerous ones. Animals became weapons, tools. Then something went wrong. The creatures escaped, and the labs were abandoned." Leela leaned forward, her heart pounding. "You know what happened to the researchers? Some died." The woman replied. "Others fled. A few stayed behind, trying to undo what they'd done. But the damage was already done, and the creatures Leela pressed. Where did they go? To the wild, the woman said simply, to places like the valley you spoke of. They sought refuge where humans wouldn't follow. The sun was setting as Leela, Jake, and Stripe left the settlement behind. The horizon glowed orange and pink, casting long shadows across the plains. They walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The information they had gathered weighed heavily on them, but it also gave them clarity. The creatures of the expanse weren't just survivors, they were symbols of what could happen when humanity pushed too far. And now, it was up to Leela and her companions to ensure their story didn't end in tragedy. As night fell, they made camp near a cluster of rocks that offered some protection from the wind. Jake built a small fire, its flickering light barely reaching beyond their immediate circle. Stripe curled up close to Leela, his warm body a comforting presence. She leaned against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest as he slept. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to rest, but sleep didn't bring peace. Her dreams were filled with images of the valley, the glowing tree, the creatures bowing to Stripe, the helicopters circling overhead. She saw flashes of destruction, forest burning, rivers drying up, skies darkened by smoke. Then came visions of hope, humans and animals working side by side, healing the land together. When she woke, tears streaked her face, though she couldn't remember why. Jake handed her a cup of tea, his expression thoughtful. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I will be," she replied, wiping her eyes. I keep thinking about what we saw, about what it means." He nodded, understanding without needing an explanation. "We've got a choice to make," he said after a moment. "We can run, keep hiding, but that won't fix anything. Or we can fight, not with guns, but with the truth." Leela stared into the flames, her mind racing. He was right. Running wouldn't save the valley or the creatures who called it home. If they wanted to protect them, they needed to expose the experiments that created them and the people responsible for abandoning them. "We need proof," she said finally. "Something undeniable. Something no one can ignore." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like Stripe," she answered firmly. "If we can show the world what he is, what he's capable of, it might change everything." It wasn't an easy decision. Bringing attention to Stripe meant risking his safety and theirs. But staying silent meant letting the cycle of fear and misunderstanding continue. Leela knew which path she had to take. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to prepare. Using materials scavenged from the settlement, Leela built a portable version of the device she'd used in the valley. It was smaller and less powerful, but it would do. Meanwhile, Jake crafted protective gear for Stripe, ensuring he wouldn't be harmed if things went wrong. They practiced activating the neural implants, testing different frequencies until they found one that worked reliably. Stripe seemed to understand what they were doing. Whenever Leela adjusted the device or explained her plan, he watched her intently, his golden eyes full of trust. She often whispered reassurances to him, promising that they would face whatever came next together. Their journey led them back towards civilization, though they avoided major towns and cities. Instead, they sought out smaller communities where rumors of the expanse still lingered. In each place, Leela shared her story, showing videos of Stripe solving puzzles or responding to commands. At first, people were skeptical, dismissing her claims as impossible or staged. But as word spread, curiosity grew. Reporters began following them, eager to capture footage of the talking tiger everyone was talking about. One evening, as they camped near a quiet river, a group of journalists arrived unannounced. Their cameras flashed brightly in the darkness, startling Stripe momentarily. Leela stepped forward, shielding him with her body. "Turn those off," she said sharply. "You're scaring him." The reporters hesitated, then lowered their equipment. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, approached cautiously. "We don't mean any harm," she said gently. "We just want to understand." Leela sighed, knowing this moment would come eventually. "Fine," she said, "but you'll do it my way." Under her guidance, the journalist filmed Stripe interacting with the device. When the signal activated, his behavior changed subtly. He turned handles, retrieved objects, and mimicked gestures with precision. But the real breakthrough came when he began using symbols drawn in the dirt to communicate. Each mark represented a concept or emotion, proving beyond doubt that his intelligence surpassed anything previously documented. The footage went viral almost instantly. People around the world watched in awe as Stripe demonstrated abilities that defied explanation. Scientists debated whether he was truly communicating or simply responding to conditioning. Activists argued that his existence proved the need for stricter regulations. On genetic experimentation, Governments scrambled to respond, caught between denial and panic. Amid the chaos, Leela remained focused. She reached out to organizations dedicated to protecting wildlife, offering Stripe's story as evidence of the harm caused by unchecked science. Slowly, allies emerged, people willing to help create a sanctuary where creatures like him could live free from fear. But not everyone supported their cause. Corporations accused her of fabricating evidence, while conspiracy theorists claimed she was part of a government cover-up. Some even threatened violence, vowing to capture Stripe and exploit his abilities for profit. Leela refused to back down. Knowing the stakes were too high, with Jake's help, she established a protected zone deep within the wilderness, a place where humans and animals could coexist peacefully. Using funds donated by supporters, they fortified the perimeter, installed surveillance systems, and hired volunteers to monitor the area. The creatures of the valley began migrating there. Drawn by instincts they couldn't explain, Stripe became a symbol of hope, his image appearing on posters and websites promoting the sanctuary. Yet despite his fame, he remained humble, content to spend his days exploring the forest or resting beside Leela. To her, he was more than a miracle, he was family. In the years that followed, the sanctuary flourished. Scientists visited to study the creatures, learning how to heal ecosystems damaged by human interference. Artists painted murals celebrating the bond between species, and children grew up believing in a future where differences didn't divide but united. Leela never stopped fighting for the creatures she loved. Even as the world changed, she remained steadfast, reminding everyone of the lessons Stripe had taught her. Intelligence isn't measured by words or actions, but by the ability to connect. One day, standing beneath the great tree in the heart of the sanctuary, she looked at Stripe and smiled. "You did it," she whispered. "You showed them." He blinked slowly, his tail swishing lazily. Then, with a soft rumble, he leaned into her hand, seeking the comfort only she could provide. Together, they had rewritten history, not with weapons or power, but with trust and understanding. And though challenges still lay ahead, Leela knew they would face them side by side. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the world is one voice brave enough to speak and one tiger smart enough to listen.